Welcome to Damon Revenge Stories. Get ready for tales of sweet revenge.
My name is Sterling Perry. I'm 29 years old. On the second Sunday of June, I stood inside Grace Fellowship Church with a speaker cable in my hand and 200 people staring at the woman who raised me. The sanctuary smelled like pulled pork and lemon bars, and the cologne my father wore every week to make God think he was decent. My mother was holding a paper plate of potato salad when the voicemail started playing through the PA system, and I watched that plate tilt sideways in slow motion. The potato salad sliding onto the carpet in a wet heap, while my father's voice filled every corner of the room. He was laughing on that recording, laughing about me, about how the kid, that's what he called me, the kid, would never check county records, about how they could collect rent on my grandmother's duplex until I turned 40 and I'd never know. 200 people heard that laugh, and not one of them was laughing back. But I need to go back, because the man standing at that podium with a cable in his hand was not the same man who sat in a one-bedroom apartment 8 months earlier, eating cereal over a sink and believing every lie his parents ever told him about who he was. Welcome back to this channel. We tell stories here about the moment someone stops swallowing the lie and starts speaking it out loud, and what happens to the room when they do. If you've ever been the one person who knew the truth, while everyone else believed the performance, this one is going to sit with you. Hit subscribe, drop a comment if you've been there. Now let me take you back to where this started, because to understand what happened in that church, you have to understand what my parents built and what they built it on top of. I grew up in Columbus, Ohio, in a house on Denison Avenue where the lawn was always edged and the gutters never sagged. My father, Greg, ran a landscaping company. My mother, Denise, taught Sunday school at Grace Fellowship and organized the annual potluck, and sat on the church finance committee and volunteered for every bake sale, coat drive, and community cleanup within a 15-mile radius. They were the Perrys. Everybody knew them. Everybody loved them. If you Googled good Christian family and added a zip code, their Christmas card would have come up first. My younger brother, Kyle, was the golden boy. Baseball scholarship, easy smile, engaged by 23 to a girl named Jessica who came from a family that owned a chain of dry cleaners across Franklin County. And then there was me, Sterling, the difficult one, the one who was bad with money. That phrase lived in my bones longer than any compliment ever did. Bad with money. My mother said it at Thanksgiving when I was 16 and asked why I couldn't get a credit card like my friends. My father said it when I was 19 and asked to see the tax return my mother had filed on my behalf. Bad with money. It was the family diagnosis, delivered with a sad shake of the head, a hand on my shoulder, a tone that said, "We love you anyway." My mother handled my tax returns until I was 22. I didn't question it. Why would I? She was the responsible one. She was the one who kept the household running while my father worked 60-hour weeks. She told me what to sign, and I signed it. She told me the refund went into a savings account. She'd set up for me, and I believed her. I believed all of it. My grandmother Ruth died in 2018. I was 21. She was the one person in the family who never called me bad with anything. She was a retired postal worker who bought a duplex on Maple Ridge Avenue in 1987 for $62,000 and spent 30 years paying and renting both units to working families. She mailed me a brass key inside my 21st birthday card with a handwritten note that said, "For when you're ready." I kept that key on my keychain for 8 years. I thought it was sentimental. A keepsake. A grandmother's way of saying she saw something in me. I didn't know it opened the front door of a property that was already mine. When Grandma Ruth passed, my father sat me down at the kitchen table, same table where he ate the pot roast my mother made every Sunday, and told me the duplex was underwater. Hemorrhaging cash, he said. Property taxes behind, tenants not paying, foundation issues that would cost more than the place was worth. He said he and my mother were managing it as a favor. As a favor so you don't lose everything, Sterling. Those were his exact words. He looked me in the eyes when he said it. My mother stood at the counter, drying a dish and nodding along like she was watching a nature documentary about a species that couldn't survive without help. I thanked them. I actually thanked them. I sat at that table and thanked my parents for stealing from me, and I didn't even know it yet. I went to college, got my degree in accounting, passed the CPA exam on my first try, got hired at a mid-sized forensic accounting firm in Columbus, the kind of place where we audit companies that suspect internal theft, trace assets through shell LLCs, reconstruct financial fraud for litigation. I was good at it, am good at it. I can follow money through 7 layers of incorporation and find the fingerprints on every transfer. But I couldn't see what was happening in my own family. That's the thing about being managed. You don't look for fraud in the people who taught you to tie your shoes. I got married at 25 to a woman named Andrea, who deserved better than a man whose parents had hollowed him out so thoroughly that he couldn't recognize his own worth. We divorced after 3 years. Amicable, sad. She told me on the last night we spent in the same apartment that I had a habit of apologizing for taking up space. And she couldn't love someone into believing they deserved to exist. I moved into a 1-bedroom on East Broad Street. $1,100 a month. I ate cereal for dinner 3 nights a week. I was rebuilding. I told myself that was what rebuilding looked like. And the whole time, a duplex with my name on the deed was generating $1,950 a month in rent. My duplex, my grandmother's gift. My tenants writing checks to my father while I counted quarters for laundry. My mother told the church I was ungrateful. She told Grace Fellowship, 200 families, people I'd known since childhood, that Sterling refused to help his struggling parents, that he'd abandoned them, that he was selfish and irresponsible and bad with money, or always had been, Wang-san. She requested a hardship fund from the Parish Benevolence Committee last Christmas. They raised $4,200 in donations for Greg and Denise Perry, the poor couple whose eldest son wouldn't lift a finger. I found that out later. $4,200 from people who passed the plate for my parents while my parents passed my rent checks into their own account. 3 years of that narrative. 3 years of church members seeing me and giving me the look, the one that says, "We know what kind of son you are." Mrs. Henderson stopped inviting me to her 4th of July barbecue. Deacon Williams shook his head when I walked past. Pastor Elijah Collins, a man I respected deeply, pulled me aside after service one Sunday and told me that honoring your father and mother was not optional. I stood there and took it. I didn't know what they'd been told. I didn't know my mother had built a whole cathedral of lies with me as the sinner. The public face of Denise Perry was extraordinary. She organized the church's annual Thanksgiving meal for 300 people. She brought casseroles to families with new babies. She held the hands of widows at funerals and cried real tears. She remembered everyone's children's names, their allergies, their favorite hymns. At the church Christmas gala last year, she stood at the microphone and gave a speech about family being the most precious gift God gives us, and how the greatest heartbreak a mother can know is watching a child walk away. She cried during that speech. The room gave her a standing ovation. I was not present. Kyle told me about it later, casually, like it was weather. The private face of Denise Perry was a woman who told me at 17 that I was the reason my father worked so hard. That if I'd been smarter, been better, been more like Kyle, they wouldn't need to carry me. She said it while folding laundry. Her voice was as flat as the towels. She told me at 20 that I shouldn't bother trying to manage my own finances because I'd only embarrass myself. She said it while signing a tax return I wasn't allowed to read. At 22, when I finally insisted on filing my own taxes, she told my father I was being difficult, and my father called me and said, in a voice that sounded like he was reading from a script my mother had written, that the family worked because everyone trusted each other. And if I couldn't trust them, maybe I wasn't ready to be part of the family. My father's public face was quieter, but equally effective. Greg Perry was the man who showed up to fix the church parking lot drainage on his own time, who donated landscaping services to the community garden, who shook every hand at every potluck and asked about your kids and your mother's hip surgery with genuine sounding interest. The congregation loved him. His clients loved him. He was the kind of man other men called solid. The private Greg Perry was the one who sat in his truck after church one Sunday when I was 19 and told me that my grandmother's duplex was a millstone around their necks, and that if I knew what was good for me, I'd let them handle it and stay out of the way. His voice had an edge that wasn't anger exactly. It was the voice of a man who was annoyed that the con required this much maintenance. I didn't recognize it then. I recognize it now in my sleep. What I found in that county database changed everything I thought I knew about my own name. It was a Tuesday in October. I was 8 months into my life in the one bedroom on East Broad Street. I was auditing a client's rental portfolio at the firm. A routine engagement. Nothing unusual. The client had holdings across central Ohio, and I was cross-referencing property addresses with county records to verify ownership chains. I was 3 hours into the spreadsheet, half a cold coffee on my desk, when my hands went cold. My body recognized the address before my brain caught up. 45117 Maple Ridge Avenue. My grandmother's duplex, listed in the audit file under a management LLC registered to Greg Perry. I stared at the screen for a long time. The fluorescent lights hummed above me. My colleague Daniel was on a phone call 2 desks over, talking about depreciation schedules. The office smelled like someone's reheated pasta, and I was looking at my grandmother's property, listed under a company my father owned, generating income I'd never seen in a database I was only reading because a stranger hired my firm to audit their landlord. I closed the spreadsheet. I opened it again. I pulled up the Ohio Secretary of State's business registry and searched for the LLC, Perry Property Holdings, registered in 2019, 1 year after my grandmother died. Registered agent, Greg Perry. I felt something shift in my chest that wasn't pain exactly. It was the sound of a load-bearing wall cracking. I left work early that day. I drove to the Franklin County Recorder's office on South High Street. The woman behind the counter was eating a sandwich and watching something on her phone. I gave her the address and asked for the deed history. She printed it out without looking up. 2 pages. The first page showed my grandmother, Ruth Perry, deeding the property at 4517 Maple Ridge Avenue to Sterling James Perry in August 2018. To me, not to my parents, not to a trust, not to an LLC. To me. Signed by my grandmother 3 months before she died. Recorded by the county. Public record. My parents never told me. I sat in my car in the recorder's office parking lot for 45 minutes. The brass key on my keychain caught the afternoon light, and I picked it up and held it and read my grandmother's note in my memory. For when you're ready. She hadn't been sentimental. She'd been literal. She'd given me the key to my own front door, and my parents had made sure I never knew which door it opened. I went back to the spreadsheet at work the next day. I was calm now. A different kind of calm. The kind that comes when the ground opens up and you realize you've been standing on air for 8 years. And the only reason you haven't fallen is because you didn't look down. I pulled the financial records for the LLC, $1,950 per month in rental income. Both units occupied continuously since 2018. That's $23,400 a year. Over 8 years, that's $187,200. Round it to $186,000. Deposited into a bank account opened with my Social Security number. An account I didn't open, an account I didn't know existed. My money, collected by my parents, deposited into an account with my name on it that I had no access to. 3 weeks later, I'd be standing at that podium with a speaker cable in my hand. That Tuesday, I was still pretending to believe them. But I wasn't done finding things. The account that held the rent deposits also showed monthly payments going out, servicing a debt I hadn't incurred. I traced it. My father had opened a home equity line of credit against the duplex for $74,000. A HELOC, using my social security number, using a power of attorney I never signed. The monthly payments were current, quietly serviced from the rent I never knew existed. My father had leveraged my property, using my identity, to pull out $74,000 in cash, and he was paying it back with my rental income while telling me the duplex was hemorrhaging money. I called the they. Not the branch, is the compliance department. I identified myself, gave my social security number, and asked about the HELOC. There was a pause. I heard a chair creak through the phone. The compliance officer's name was Carla. Her voice had the specific flatness of someone who has seen this before and knows exactly what it means. "Mr. Perry, I need to be direct," she said. "A HELOC was opened using your identity without your authorization. The forged power of attorney has been flagged. This has been referred to our fraud division. You should consult an attorney." She told me the line had been frozen, pending investigation. My parents didn't know. The clock was ticking. 30 days before the bank's fraud division would make a criminal referral to the county prosecutor. 30 days during which my parents would continue to believe everything was fine, that the con was still running, that the kid would never check. I need to tell you about my brother Kyle, because what happened next made the betrayal three-dimensional. Kyle was 24, engaged to Jessica, driving a truck that cost $28,000. I'd assumed he'd financed it. He hadn't. Jessica's best friend forwarded me a screenshot of a text Kyle had sent Jessica 5 months earlier. The text said, "Mom and Dad said Sterling doesn't need to know. He's the one who's bad with money anyway." The $28,000 truck was purchased from the duplex account. My duplex. My money. My brother's truck. And Aunt Linda, my mother's sister. The power of attorney my father used to open the HELOC required notarization. Linda notarized it at her kitchen table, with a stamp that doesn't match any registered notary in the state of Ohio. I found this because, as a forensic accountant, I know where to look. The Ohio Secretary of State maintains a searchable database of commissioned notaries. Linda's name doesn't appear. The stamp number on the document doesn't correspond to any registered stamp. My aunt forged a legal document at her kitchen table so my parents could steal more efficiently from their son. My mother hugged me at the church door that Sunday. Her perfume smelled like Sunday. Her hands smelled like fraud. I built the folder over 3 weeks. Not because I needed to build anything. My parents had built it for me. Greg's voicemail sat on the family's shared iCloud account. I still had access. The voicemail was a message from my father to my mother, left casually, the way you'd leave a message about picking up milk. "The kid will never check county records. We could collect rent on that duplex until he's 40 and he'd never know. Your mother's gift keeps on giving. To us." He laughed at the end, a short, satisfied laugh. The laugh of a man who thinks he's gotten away with it. Kyle's texts existed as screenshots. The county recorder's deed sat in a manila envelope. The bank's compliance letter, the one Carla sent after our call, was folded inside that same envelope. 8 years of deposits, traced and printed, the fake power of attorney with Linda's fraudulent notary stamp. Everything organized, everything dated, everything undeniable. I told one person. My coworker Daniel, who had been 2 desks over the day, the address appeared on the spreadsheet. Daniel was the one who noticed I'd gone pale that Tuesday and brought me a glass of water without asking why. Over beers at a bar on North High Street, I told him everything. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he set down his glass and said, "Sterling, they didn't just steal your money. They stole your story. They told everyone you were the problem so no one would ever look at them. The only way to get your story back is to tell it where they told theirs." He was right. The money could be recovered through attorneys and courts. But the narrative, the 3 years of my mother painting me as the ungrateful son, the congregation's judgment, the pastor's disappointment, the social exile that could only be corrected in the same room where it was constructed. Grace Fellowship, the annual potluck, 200 members, my parents' stage. But before I got there, something almost stopped me. The charm offensive. 2 weeks before the potluck, my parents invited me to dinner. Not Sunday dinner, a special dinner. A celebration, my mother called it. She said they wanted to help me through the divorce. She said they'd been thinking about it, and they wanted to pay for a divorce lawyer for me. My father nodded from across the table with the generosity of a man spending someone else's money, because that's exactly what he was doing. They were offering to pay for my lawyer with rent from my duplex, deposited into an account bearing my name, that they controlled. I sat at that dinner and ate my mother's roast chicken and thanked them. I smiled. I said that was incredibly generous. My father poured me a second glass of wine and clapped me on the shoulder and said, "That's what family's for, son." His hand was heavy and warm, and I thought about the voice, and the laugh and the $74,000, and I kept smiling. My mother noticed something that night. I don't know what tipped her off. Maybe I held eye contact too long. Maybe I didn't apologize enough. Maybe something in my posture had changed in a way that 29 years of familiarity could detect. After I left, she searched my briefcase. I know, because Kyle told me later. She didn't find anything. I kept the folder at the office, not at home. But she told my father that Sterling was acting different. My father dismissed it. Of course he did. He'd spent 8 years believing I was too dumb to find them out. The Sunday before the potluck, Kyle sent me a late-night text. 11:47 p.m. "Hey man, I'm sorry, I didn't know it was that bad. Can we talk?" I stared at that text for a long time. I wanted it to be real. I wanted my brother to be someone who had been dragged along, not someone who drove a $28,000 truck purchased with my stolen income and joked about it to his fiancée. But the timing was suspicious. 1 week before the event. After my mother told my father I was acting different, I didn't respond. I couldn't afford to be wrong about who Kyle was. Not now. The morning of the potluck, I put on a blue Oxford shirt and khakis. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror of my one-bedroom apartment. $1,100 a month in rent for a man who owned a duplex. I picked up the brass key from my keychain, my grandmother's key, and held it in my palm. For when you're ready, I was ready. I'd been to 45-117 Maple Ridge Avenue the week before. First time I'd used the key. It opened the front door of Unit A. The tenant, a woman named Mrs. Okafor, opened the interior door and looked at me with the wariness of someone who doesn't know why the landlord's son is standing in the foyer. I introduced myself. I told her I was Sterling Perry. I owned the building. She said she knew. She'd been paying Greg Perry in cash envelopes every first of the month for 6 years, but the deed had always been in Sterling's name. She'd assumed I knew. She'd assumed the father collected on behalf of the son. I stood in the hallway of my own building and felt the key grow warm in my hand, and understood for the first time what my grandmother had given me and what my parents had taken. I drove to Grace Fellowship with the folder on the passenger seat and a USB drive in my shirt pocket. The voicemail was on the USB. I'd tested it 3 times on my laptop. Clear audio. My father's voice, unmistakable. The laugh at the end, unmistakable. I'd called the church earlier that week and asked the audio technician Marcus about the PA system. I told him I wanted to play a short family tribute during the potluck. He showed me the aux input behind the pulpit. Speaker cable, 3.5 millimeter jack. I thanked him and shook his hand and went home and sat in the dark for 2 hours. The parking lot at Grace Fellowship was full when I arrived. Cars I recognized, the Henderson Suburban, Deacon Williams Buick, the Patterson's minivan. Families carrying casserole dishes wrapped in foil. Children running between cars. The June sun was high and the air smelled like fresh-cut grass. My father's landscaping crew had mowed the church grounds the day before, free of charge, as they did every summer. Community service, generosity, performance. I walked in through the side entrance carrying a plate of brownies I'd bought from the Kroger on East Main. The fellowship hall was set up with long folding tables covered in white tablecloths, paper plates, plastic cups, a table near the back piled with slow cookers and foil trays. The room buzzed with conversation. 200 people, maybe more, filling the space with the warm noise of a community that believed it knew itself. My mother was near the front, arranging name tags at a welcome table. She wore a lavender blouse and pearl earrings, and her smile was the one she put on for public consumption. Wide, warm, practiced. She saw me, and her smile brightened, and she came toward me with her arms open. "Sterling, honey, I'm so glad you came." She hugged me. Her perfume was floral and sweet, and her hands pressed against my back, and I felt the USB drive in my pocket like a coal against my chest. My father was across the room, talking to Deacon Williams and two men I recognized from the Rotary Club. He was laughing. His shoulders were relaxed. He was wearing the blue polo he wore to every church event, the one my mother ironed on Saturday nights. He looked like a man with nothing to hide. He looked like what he'd always looked like to everyone in this room. Solid. Kyle was there, standing near the dessert table with Jessica. He glanced at me when I walked in and then looked away. Not hostile. Not warm. The specific neutrality of someone who knows something is coming, but isn't sure what. Pastor Elijah Collins was moving through the room with his usual ease, shaking hands, touching shoulders, laughing at jokes. He was a tall man with a deep voice and a presence that commanded attention without demanding it. He was the man who'd pulled me aside and told me to honor my parents. He was the man my mother had spent 3 years lying to. I set my brownies on the dessert table and made small talk. I complimented Mrs. Henderson's macaroni and cheese. I asked Mr. Patterson about his daughter's college applications. I shook Deacon Williams's hand, and he held it a beat too long and looked at me with that expression. The one that said, "I know what kind of son you are." I smiled. I said it was good to see him. I meant it in a way he couldn't have understood. The potluck proceeded through its rituals. Grace was said by Pastor Collins. Lines formed at the food tables. People filled plates and found seats, and the room settled into the comfortable rhythm of people eating and talking in a space they considered safe. My mother circulated, making sure everyone had what they needed. My father sat with a group of men and told a story that made them laugh. From across the room, they looked like exactly what they'd always appeared to be. If you've ever watched someone who hurt you receive love from people you respect, if you've sat in a room where the person who degraded you in private is being celebrated in public, and you had to smile through it, you know what that room felt like to me. You know the specific temperature of that silence inside your chest. You know how loud the laughter sounds when you're the only one who knows the joke isn't funny. You know the way a fork feels in your hand when your fingers have gone numb, but you keep cutting into a piece of chicken, because stopping would mean looking up. And looking up would mean making eye contact with the woman who taught you to set a table and then use the table to take everything you had. An hour into the potluck, Pastor Collins took the microphone. Annual tradition, a few words of gratitude, acknowledgement of volunteers, a prayer. He thanked the organizing committee. He thanked Denise Perry specifically for her tireless work. The room applauded. My mother pressed her hand to her chest in that practiced gesture of humble surprise. My father beamed. I watched from a table near the side wall, my plate untouched, the USB drive in my pocket. The applause lasted 7 seconds. I counted everyone. The pastor finished. There was a brief transition, music starting from the speakers, conversations resuming. I stood up. My legs felt like they belonged to someone else. I walked toward the front of the hall. The floor was that industrial tile they use in church basements, beige with flecks of brown, and my shoes made no sound on it. Marcus, the audio tech, was near the soundboard. I caught his eye and held up the USB drive and mouthed the words, "Family Tribute." In line, He nodded and plugged in the cable and handed me the 3.5 millimeter end. His fingers were warm. Mine were ice. I stepped to the microphone. The room didn't go silent immediately. I wasn't expected to speak. People were still eating, still talking. But the microphone picked up my voice, and the speakers carried it, and one by one, the conversations died, the way a pond goes, still after you drop a stone. The ripples moving outward until the last table in the back corner went quiet, and a child's laugh was shushed, and the room held its breath without knowing why. "I want to thank my parents," I said. My voice was steady. I'd practiced this in my apartment, standing in front of the bathroom mirror. But the practice hadn't felt like this. The room was warm. The fluorescent lights hummed. 200 faces turned toward me. I could see the condensation on the sweet tea pitchers. I could see the steam rising from the slow cookers at the back table. I could feel the cable in my left hand, the thin wire running from my phone to the PA system, like a fuse. For years, my parents have selflessly managed a family property on my behalf. My grandmother Ruth left a duplex on Maple Ridge Avenue, and my parents took on the burden of managing it. So I wouldn't have to. I've never properly thanked them for that. So I want to do it now. My mother's face was glowing. She thought this was a gift. She reached for my father's hand under the table and squeezed it. I saw her knuckles whiten from 15 feet away. My father's chest expanded. He nodded at Deacon Williams as if to say, "See, the kid finally gets it." Deacon Williams smiled back. The whole room was smiling. They were about to witness a family reconciliation. They were about to see the ungrateful son come home. But before I do, I said, I want to share something. A voicemail my father left my mother. I think it captures their dedication better than any words of mine could. I plugged the USB into my phone. I connected the cable. The jack clicked into the port with a sound so small, only I could hear it. I pressed play. My father's voice filled the sanctuary, casual, relaxed. The voice of a man leaving a message about something as routine as dinner plans. The kid will never check county records. We could collect rent on that duplex until he's 40, and he'd never know. Your mother's gift keeps on giving. To us. The laugh. That short, satisfied laugh. It bounced off the cinder block walls of the fellowship hall and came back from every direction, so that for a moment, my father's laugh was surrounding him, closing in on him, filling the air he was trying to breathe. The room went silent. Not quiet, silent. The specific silence of 200 people processing the same information at the same time. I could hear the ice melting in someone's sweet tea. I could hear the air conditioning cycling through the overhead vent. I could hear my own heartbeat in my temples. I could hear the creak of a folding chair as someone shifted their weight. I could hear the soft click of a woman setting down her fork on a paper plate. The silence had texture. It had weight. It pressed against the walls of that room like water rising. My mother's plate slipped. It didn't crash. It slid sideways from her fingers, and the potato salad hit the carpet with a soft, wet sound that was somehow the loudest thing in the room. A yellow smear of mustard and egg spread across the beige carpet near her left shoe. Her face went from glowing to gray in a single breath. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. Her hand was still extended, still shaped around the plate that was no longer there, fingers curled around air. My father stood up. His chair scraped against the floor, a harsh metallic sound that made the woman next to him flinch. That was taken out of context, he said. His voice was too loud. The microphone wasn't near him, but the room was so silent that everyone heard it. His neck had gone red above the collar of his blue polo. The same blue polo my mother ironed every Saturday night. The same blue polo he wore to look solid. "What context?" I said, and my voice through the speakers was calm and level. And I barely recognized it as mine. "Makes identity fraud acceptable?" I held up the deed. The paper trembled slightly in my hand, and I steadied it with my other hand so that the trembling stopped. I wanted them to see steady hands. I needed them to see steady hands. My grandmother Ruth deeded 4517 Maple Ridge Avenue to me in August 2018. Not to my parents. To me. I pulled the records from the Franklin County Recorder's Office. The property generates $1,950 per month in rent. Over 8 years, that's $186,000, deposited into a bank account opened with my Social Security number. An account I didn't open. An account I never had access to. I heard Mrs. Henderson inhale sharply behind me. The sound was sudden and involuntary. The kind of breath you take when cold water hits your skin. I didn't turn around. My father also opened a $74,000 home equity line of credit against my property, using my Social Security number and a forged power of attorney, notarized by my Aunt Linda, whose stamp number doesn't match any registered notary in the state of Ohio. The room absorbed each sentence like a body absorbing blows. I watched the information travel across faces. The confusion first, the furrowed brows, the sideways glances, and then the understanding. Arriving like a weather system, changing the temperature of every expression it touched. I looked at my father. His face had gone through the stages. The frozen smile, the dismissive laugh that died before it reached his eyes, the flash of anger, and now something I'd never seen on Greg Perry's face in public. Fear. Raw. Animal fear. His hands were on the table in front of him, and I could see them pressing flat against the white tablecloth, pressing down as though the table might hold him up if his legs decided not to. Because the room was watching. His room. His audience. His stage. And every face in it was rearranging. My mother moved toward me. Her hand reached for my phone. "Sterling, stop this. Stop this right now. You don't know what you're..." "Denise." My father's voice. Sharp. A warning. Not the warning of a husband protecting his wife. The warning of a co-conspirator telling his partner to stop talking before she made it worse. My mother froze. Her hand hung in the air between us. Her pearl earring caught the fluorescent light and threw a tiny dot of white onto the wall behind her, and that small, bright point was the only thing in the room that moved. Pastor Collins stepped between us. His hand came up, palm out, and my mother stopped like she'd hit glass. "Denise," he said. Just her name. But the way he said it carried the weight of 3 years of lies. He was only now beginning to understand. His voice had dropped half an octave. The room heard it. The room understood it. For 3 years, I said, and now my voice cracked. Just slightly. The first fracture in the control I'd held all evening. My mother told this congregation that I abandoned my struggling parents, that I was ungrateful, that I refused to help. Last Christmas, this church raised $4,200 in a hardship fund for my parents, while my parents were collecting $1,950 a month from my property, while I was paying $1,100 in rent for a one-bedroom apartment, while I was eating cereal for dinner because they made me believe that I was bad with money. I paused. The pause lasted 5 full seconds. I let it sit in the room. I let every person in that room feel the weight of those 5 seconds, the way I'd felt the weight of 8 years. Deacon Williams sat down slowly, as though the chair might not hold him. His hands gripped the edge of the table, and I watched his knuckles turn the same white my mother's had turned when she was squeezing my father's hand in pride just 3 minutes earlier. Mrs. Patterson covered her mouth with her hand. Her eyes were wet. 3 rows back, a woman I recognized as one of my mother's closest friends, Carol Myers, turned to look at Denise with an expression that I can only describe as the face of someone realizing they've been defending a stranger. Carol's casserole dish sat in front of her untouched, and she stared at my mother as though she was seeing her for the first time, and what she saw bore no resemblance to the woman she'd been carpooling with for 11 years. A man near the back, I think it was Tom Avery, who ran the church men's group, pushed his chair back from the table. Not to leave. Just to create distance. The scrape of the chair legs on the tile echoed in the silence. Then something happened that I hadn't planned. That I couldn't have planned. Mrs. Okafor stood up. I hadn't known she was a member of Grace Fellowship. I hadn't seen her come in. But there she was, in the third row, rising to her feet with the deliberate calm of a woman who has made a decision. She smoothed the front of her dress with both hands before she spoke, a gesture so composed it made the room lean forward. "I'm the tenant in Unit A," she said. Her voice was clear and carried without a microphone. "I've been paying Greg Perry in cash envelopes every first of the month for 6 years, $900 a month. He told me the building was his. He never once mentioned a son. When Sterling came to the building last week, it was the first time I'd met the man whose name is on my lease." The room turned to my father. Every head, every pair of eyes. The rotation was almost synchronized, like a congregation turning to face an altar. Except the altar was a man in a blue polo, whose forehead was now shining with sweat under the fluorescent lights. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. His lips were dry. I could see him lick them from across the room. "You don't understand the situation," he said, but his voice had lost its shape. The solid man was melting. There were expenses. The property needed. "Greg," Pastor Collins' voice cut through the room from the microphone he'd taken from me gently, without me noticing. The pastor's hand was steady on the mic. His jaw was set in a line I'd never seen before. The line of a man who has just realized he was used as a prop. "Is this young man's name on the deed to that property?" My father didn't answer. His mouth opened once more and then closed. And the closing of it was the loudest admission anyone in that room had ever heard. "Is his social security number on that HELOC?" Silence. 12 seconds of it. I know because the wall clock behind the dessert table was the old kind. The kind with a second hand that ticks audibly, and I counted 12 ticks before the pastor spoke again. "Did you or did you not tell this congregation that your son abandoned you?" My mother started crying. Not the crying she did at the Christmas gala, the pretty crying, the empathetic crying. The crying that earned standing ovations. This was ugly crying. This was the sound of a mask cracking along every seam it had ever been glued. Her mascara ran in 2 dark lines down her cheeks. Her shoulders shook in a rhythm that was nothing like the graceful trembling she performed at funerals. This was the crying of a woman who had run out of performances. My father put his hand on her shoulder. She shrugged it off. I had never seen her do that. Not once in 29 years. The shrug was small, just a roll of her left shoulder, a pulling away of 2 inches. But in the grammar of their marriage, it was a door slamming. Pastor Collins turned to the room. He was a man who had spent decades speaking to congregations, and I watched him summon every ounce of that authority. His voice filled the space the way a hymn fills a space. Not with volume, but with conviction. "I think this church owes this young man an apology," he said. "I know I owe him one. Sterling, I am sorry. I believed what I was told. I should have asked more questions." The silence after that was the one I'll carry for the rest of my life. Not the voicemail silence, not the confrontation silence. The silence of 200 people sitting with the knowledge that they had participated in something without knowing it. That their admiration had been panasansrain, for our admiration had weaponized. That their hawks and their compassion had been exploited. That the story they'd believed for 3 years was a construction built to hide theft. I looked out at those faces and I saw the rearranging still happening. The recalculation behind the eyes. The mental scrolling back through 3 years of potlucks and prayer circles and parking lot conversations, re-examining every interaction with my mother through a lens that had just been ground and polished in front of them. Kyle left through the side door. He didn't speak. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at anyone. He just walked out, and Jessica didn't follow him. And the door closed behind him with a click that sounded like a period at the end of a sentence. Through the narrow window in the door, I saw him cross the parking lot with his hands in his pockets, walking toward the $28,000 truck that my money had paid for. I unplugged the cable. The small pop of the jack leaving the port was the last sound the PA system made. I picked up the manila envelope from the podium. The one with the deed, the bank statements, the compliance letter, the screenshots of Kyle's texts. I walked back through the night room. People parted for me, not dramatically. There was no movie moment. They just shifted in their chairs, moved their cups, made space. The aisle formed naturally, the way a path forms through snow when enough people walk it. Mrs. Henderson reached out and touched my arm as I passed. Her fingers were light on my sleeve. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. I walked to the parking lot. The sun was still up. The air still smelled like fresh-cut grass. My father's crew's work, his gift to the church, his performance of generosity. I sat in my car and held the brass key and breathed. Just breathed. The kind of breathing you do when you've been holding your breath for 8 years and you finally remember how lungs work. My hands were shaking now. They hadn't shaken at the podium, but they shook here, in the privacy of my own car, where no one could see them. I let them shake. I let the shaking have its time. Outside the windshield, the parking lot was still full. No one had left yet. They were all still inside, sitting with it. If someone in your family ever made you feel stupid about money so they could control yours, you weren't stupid. You were being managed. And the fact that you believed them doesn't make you weak. It makes you someone who loved the people who were supposed to love you back. What was the first financial decision you made completely on your own? Tell me in the comments. I want to hear it. The weeks after the potluck moved like water finding its level, every surface in the community tilted and things slid to where they actually belonged. Greg and Denise were removed from the church finance committee within 4 days. Pastor Collins made the call himself on a Wednesday evening. I heard later that my mother argued, "Såsing människor in your ear," that she said the committee needed her, that she'd given years of service, that one misunderstanding shouldn't undo all of that. The pastor told her it wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a pattern. She hung up on him. It was the first time in her life that hanging up on someone didn't give her the last word. The Hendersons uninvited my parents from the 4th of July barbecue. Not with a confrontation, with silence. The invitation simply never came. My mother called Mrs. Henderson twice. Both calls went to voicemail. Both voicemails went unreturned. The phone rang in Mrs. Henderson's kitchen, and Mrs. Henderson looked at the caller ID and set down her spatula and let it ring, and my mother listened to the ringing on the other end and heard in those unanswered tones what Sterling Perry had heard for 3 years, the sound of a community turning its back. 3 of Denise's closest friends, Carol Myers, Brelt Sistrandro, Brenda Thornton, Patrice Hall, Shota Nisham, stopped returning calls. Carol told a mutual acquaintance that she felt sick about the hardship fund. "I wrote a check for $200, she said, for people who were collecting $2,000 a month from their own son's property. Brenda removed Denise from a group text that had been active for 9 years. No announcement, no explanation, just a name vanishing from the thread. My father's landscaping clients began canceling contracts. The story moved through the Rotary Club like smoke through a screen door. Invisible but everywhere. Jim Caruso, who'd had Greg's crew maintain his commercial properties for 11 years, called and said he was going in a different direction. 2 more clients followed that week. By the end of the month, my father had lost 7 accounts, totaling an estimated $41,000 in annual revenue. His business didn't collapse overnight, but it began the slow contraction of a life built on trust that no longer existed. His crew shrank from 6 men to 3. The truck with Perry Landscaping, stenciled on the door, sat in the driveway more often than it left. Kyle's fiancée Jessica returned the engagement ring. Kyle's girlfriend forwarded text, the one about Sterling not needing to know, had reached Jessica through a chain of people that included her mother. Jessica's mother owned dry cleaning stores. She understood fraud. She understood liability. She told Jessica, according to what Jessica later told a friend who told me, if his parents stole from his brother and he watched, what would stop them from doing it to you? Jessica didn't argue. She didn't negotiate. She set the ring on Kyle's kitchen counter and left. The ring sat there for 2 days before Kyle put it in a drawer. I know, because Jessica told her friend, and her friend told me. A $1,400 ring in a kitchen drawer in an apartment furnished with my stolen money. Aunt Linda received a letter from the Ohio Secretary of State's office. Her notary credentials, which had never been legitimate, were under formal investigation. The fraudulent stamp, traced through the Hellock documents, opened a thread that the state had no interest in leaving unpulled. Linda called my mother in a panic. Her voice on the phone, I was told, was the voice of a woman who had always assumed the small crimes were too small to matter. My mother called my father. My father called a lawyer. The lawyer told him what the bank's compliance officer had already told me. This had been referred to the county prosecutor. The lawyer's retainer was $12,000. My father paid it from a savings account that was, for once, actually his own money. The bank's fraud division completed its investigation in 3 weeks. The HELOC was flagged as identity fraud. The account that held 8 years of rent deposits was frozen. My father received a certified letter that made him, I'm told, sit in his truck in the driveway for 45 minutes without moving. The engine off, the windows up, the June heat pressing against the glass. 45 minutes of a man sitting with the specific silence of consequences arriving. People who had never spoken to me at church began speaking to me. Not with warmth exactly, with the specific awkwardness of people who know they misjudge someone and don't quite know how to say it. They approached me in the parking lot, in the narthex, in the grocery store cereal aisle. Deacon Williams found me in the parking lot after the following Sunday's service and shook my hand with both of his and said, I owe you an apology, son. I listened to the wrong story. His grip was firm, and his eyes were wet, and he held on for a long time. Mr. Patterson left a voicemail, saying his daughter wanted to bake me a pie. Mrs. Henderson invited me specifically by name, to the 4th of July barbecue. She called on a Tuesday evening and said my name like she was saying it for the first time, like the syllables had been rinsed and returned to her clean. The brass key sits on my kitchen counter now, next to the duplex lease agreement I reviewed myself for the first time last month. The counter is white laminate, and the key catches the morning light and throws a small gold rectangle onto the wall above the stove. I hired a property management company, a real one, licensed, bonded, with no relation to anyone named Perry. The tenants in both units are staying. Mrs. Okafor told me she was glad the building was finally being managed by the person whose name was on it. She said it like it was the most obvious thing in the world. She also told me the hallway radiator in Unit A had been rattling for 2 years, and my father had never fixed it. I had to fix that Thursday. It cost $140. The silence in that hallway afterward was the sound of a building exhaling. Daniel and I had dinner last week at the same bar on North High Street where I'd told him everything 8 months ago. The same booth, the same bartender, a woman named Rachel who poured heavy and didn't make small talk. He asked how I was doing, and I said something that surprised both of us. I said I was grateful. Not for what happened, for what I learned about the difference between being believed and being known. For 29 years, my parents believed I was someone they could manage. The church believed I was someone who abandoned his family. Andrea believed I was someone who couldn't take up space. None of them knew me. They knew the version of me that my parents' narrative had constructed. The version that was bad with money, bad with family, bad with life. The night I played that voicemail, I stopped being the person other people believed I was. I became the person I actually am. A forensic accountant who can follow money through 7 layers of lies. A grandson who was loved by a woman who gave him a key and trusted him to use it. A man who pays his own rent and reads his own leases and files his own taxes and makes his own decisions. My phone rang on a Tuesday evening. Dad glowed on the screen. I set it on the kitchen counter next to the brass key and let it ring. Not with rage, not with guilt, with the steady calm of a man who no longer needs anyone's permission to protect what's his. The phone vibrated against the counter 3 more times, and then went to voicemail. I didn't check it. I turned back to the lease agreement, my duplex, my name, my life. The apartment was quiet. The brass key caught the light from the kitchen window. Outside, Columbus was doing what Columbus does in late summer. The light going golden, the trees full, the evening stretching out like it has nowhere particular to be. I could hear my neighbor's television through the wall. I could hear a dog barking 2 floors down. I could hear the specific quality of silence that exists when you're no longer keeping a secret, and no one is keeping one from you. I used to think trust meant believing the people who raised you. I was wrong. Trust means verifying. And still choosing to love the people who survive the verification, and the ones who don't survive it. You let the phone ring, that's the story. One brass key that opened a door I didn't know was mine. One voicemail that opened a room full of people's eyes. And one spreadsheet on a Tuesday afternoon that taught a forensic accountant the most important audit of his life was the one he never thought to run on his own family. If you've ever looked at someone you love and wondered whether the version of you they describe to others matches the person you know you are, I'd like to hear about it. Leave a comment. Subscribe if this meant something to you. I'll be here next time with another story.